I've asked Jim Cornette to come back on the show this week to talk about a couple topics that he has a little bit of background with, and Jim is here with us. Jim, how are you?
You told me that I was getting a free gift to be a guest here. You convinced me to come back that way, Brian. What is my free gift?
Well, on the topic of free gifts, send me your t-shirt size and you'll get a new copy, a new 605 Super Podcast t-shirt sent right to your doorstep, right to Castle Cornette.
Well, there you go. So that's why I'm doing this. I'm whoring myself out for garments. What were you going to ask me?
Well, let's start with Roddy Piper real quick. You know, this is the anniversary, the 1 year since his passing. And I know that Roddy was a influence on you, was one of your favorites when you were just getting started in the business, before you were in the business, and you got to see him live. We talked about you seeing him in Cincinnati beat up a fan after the fan made the mistake of attacking him. I wanted to ask you just some of your favorite Roddy Piper moments, memories. When did you first see him? And to throw one last question in that list of questions. Oh, Jesus
Christ. What is this, an essay? Well, you're going to have to write this on the board.
Well, you know, let's just start with that. When did you first see him?
Just to follow up. Learn the art of the follow-up, Brian. No, in all seriousness, and obviously it was last year because I was hosting, I'll be presenting at the Hall of Heroes this year at the Charlotte Fan Fest, but I was hosting the program last year and of course had my 10-minute comedy routine lined up. I'm sure I would have got over like George Carlin. It was phenomenal. And then they came up and told me the news about Roddy, and I had to actually impart that to the one room, the one gathering, of anywhere in the country that would have more of Roddy's personal friends and longest fans. So that was obviously challenging, but I had first seen Roddy, right at the time that he went to Crockett Promotions is where VHS and home video became a thing. And if you could get, obviously, if you could get any outside your territory wrestling tape, as we've talked about many times, it was Shangri-La. But if you got, Mid-Atlantic wrestling from the Carolinas, now you're getting the Cadillac stuff here, right? This is the heavy stuff. You can mainline this shit. And obviously, Roddy, along with Ric Flair, everybody started saying, we want to see Flair and Piper, right, from the Carolinas. So the tapes got more prized, and I got a few of them. But then, lo and behold, Crockett opens up Cincinnati in like 1981, and they get TV on Channel 5. I monkey with my antenna. I turned the rotor, and I put up with like severe ghostitis, like a black and white ghost picture of a TV station with crummy audio to get to hear Roddy Piper, say, just when you think you got all the answers, I changed the questions, man, and he was fantastic. And then we'd get to take the trips to Cincinnati to see him in person when he was on the card. They had such a big territory and a big talent roster, but that they rotated talent. But at any rate, he was different. And a lot of people forget now, his work in the Carolinas. I mean, the WWF was a whole different thing, and he became a megastar, and et cetera, et cetera. But not only his work in the Carolinas as far as promos, being able to try that shit for the first time and playing the bagpipes and taking interminably long, right? Like just 3 minutes to blow that fucking thing up, and the people are just boiling. But also people forget about how good his work was. He was so aggressive. And he looked like he was beating you up and jerking you around. And when, then when he did, because he wasn't a big guy, so he would do that on offense. But then if he got pickled and he's backpedaling, and that's what, where the heat came from. So his work would just all the way around the spectrum was great. And that's why I became a fan. And then when I got in the business, I really hardly ever got to see him again. We never worked in the same place at the same time. And then in the early days, I would I would fall back on my plan of not watching any WWF to watch Roddy Piper stuff. But it wasn't the same gritty Roddy Piper, but of course he was, bigger than the business a couple years later.
When did you first get to watch him in Georgia as a commentator, and what did you think of that performance?
Oh, my God, I forgot. And actually, Georgia, I did get to see some, especially my first year in the business, because we had cable in Nashville when I moved down there. I just got in business. And also, that was the end of 82 also. So trading some tapes and get to see more of TBS, because I didn't have cable here at the castle in 1982. Imagine that. We were too far back in the woods then. But anyway, the color stuff was great, especially the shit with Bob Armstrong. And he got to go back and forth with Jerry Lawler, and they were going to do a whole big long thing. And then I think Ole fired him.
Yes, I believe so.
And as Roddy would have probably said, for cause, because he was doing things that he shouldn't have been doing, probably at a higher rate of speed there than normal. And that kind of brought that run to an end. Yeah. And then, I got a chance to see a little bit of the last bit of the Carolina stuff, obviously with the dog collar match with Valentine. But he was classic old school wrestling psychology, just turned up to the fucking 11. It just, nobody hardly got it as good as he did. But so it wasn't like he was breaking any ground. He just did it better than anybody else, whether it be always just subtle things, always referring. He never said, I'm going to wrestle so-and-so. I'm going to fight so-and-so. Just everything about him. That's why he never did the job to Hogan, because he wanted to still protect the aura that he had, that he was not the guy that rolled over and played dead for the promoters. It was always the outlaw, and nobody could touch him because he was too good, blah, blah, blah. And it worked.
Yeah, and you mentioned one of the great, what could have been feuds of all time, which was Lawler versus Piper, in 82, 83.
Oh,
just
God,
the promos alone, it would have been the greatest program of that time.
But the matches, honestly, with Piper being the babyface and Lawler being the heel at that time would have been classic too, because they were both in their prime, and Piper loved to sell. You can say with the dog collar thing, he loved to sell. And he did that, differently than a lot of people. So, anyway.
And the other way around, it would have been fun too if somehow that relationship led to, during that same run, Piper working in Memphis as a heel against babyface Lawler.
Oh, Brian, now you're going to make me rub my nipples. What are you doing this to me for? It's just, no. It would have been nice. But, gosh, we just have to live on the body of work he created without it, I guess.
Well, one last thing on Piper. Like you said, you really weren't around him at all. I mean, I know you had a brief thing at WrestleMania 10 when you were at ringside for Yokozuna and he was the referee. But other than that, you really never got to work with him. But in the last few months of his life, you were a somewhat regular guest on his show. It seemed that he enjoyed talking to you and he enjoyed hearing from you. What was that like for you? Someone who grew up watching him, liking him, someone who never got to be around him and kind of wished you had, to finally, all these years later, develop a little bit of a relationship with Roddy Piper.
Well, and that was the thing. And also, we did get to work a WWF pay-per-view here at the Louisville Gardens in 96, when Piper did the 5-minute promo and I did the 30-second response, and Bruce Pritchard yelled at me for going too long because Michaels was hot. We cut into his fucking 5-star masterpiece or whatever. Like, I'm going to tell Roddy Piper to shut up. And that was a thrill, working with him here in the Gardens. And, and we had seen each other at Fan Fest of recent years and visited a time or two. But yes, I'd done his podcast a couple of different times, and he had just, as producer, I'd just been talking to him about doing a regular monthly, guest spot thing when he was changing podcast platforms. And, obviously that happened. And that was once again, what might have been, finally get a chance after all these years to do something on a regular basis with Roddy. And he was so nice, and it was funny off top of our heads. He was a guy you could have a conversation with and be entertaining on a podcast and, et cetera. So, that's just another example of something. Timing is everything.